Hello, and welcome to the Thief in the Empty Room podcast, where Zen meets business in a unique exploration of mindfulness and mental health. Join me, your host, Craig French, as I sit down with artists, entrepreneurs, and Zen teachers to uncover the secrets of expanding creative problem solving, reducing stress, and finding balance in this fast-paced world. Today's guest for season 2 and episode number 7 is Jeff Nieves, the Hollywood screenwriter of Resident Alien, Wolfpack, and Tyler, just to name a few. He is a longtime Buddhist practitioner, having experience with multiple lineages, and someone I can call a friend, who I've spent many, many hours meditating with over the years. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. So, as I think you're aware, the name of the podcast is called The Thief in the Empty Room. So I like to start off with jumping right in, getting our feet wet by reading the koan that the show is named after. So are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. So a monk asked his teacher, what concrete thing did the ancestral masters get when they obtained the peaceful state? The teacher responded, it is like a thief who enters an empty room. Tell me if you want to hear it one more time.
Yes.
Okay. A,
Yes.
a monk asked his teacher, what concrete thing did the ancestral masters get when they obtained the peaceful state? The teacher said, it is like a thief who enters an empty room. What does that mean to you, if anything? How does that show up for you?
I mean, I feel like it's the sort of, and I don't know if this is exactly the story, but there's was it the Chinese emperor who donated all these stuff to different temples, and he asked, I think it was the first patriarch, like,
Bodhidharma.
yeah, Bodhidharma, like, okay, what do I get? And he basically says nothing. It seems like a Zen nothing, like the thing that he got that was concrete was nothing. That's where I would take it.
So if that's the case and you're actually correct in your assessment, does that mean that Zen is all about nothing and nothingness? And is it sort of like that old idea that it's like nihilistic and you know what I mean, void of anything useful?
I think it's nothing, but I don't think nothing is useless. I think nothing is like the opposite. Nothing is like
Everything.
the best starting place usually is from nothing because I think we get in a lot of trouble when we start. It just makes me think about like you're talking with your wife and you start arguing about like who's gonna cook the green peppers or something. That argument's about like it should just be about green peppers. It's not. It's about like all this other stuff. If you were coming from nothing, it would just be about green peppers, be a lot easier.
That's so interesting that you say that because I feel like I've had a lot of conversations over the years with married folk. And there's a couple that I'm thinking like specifically where I'm talking to a friend and he's sort of telling me about a little tiff he got into with his wife. And yes, the fight ends up being about this very particular thing. In this case, I'm thinking about the internet. Who paid the internet bill? Or who didn't pay the internet
Yeah.
bill? And I said to him, is it really about the internet
No.
bill? And he said, no, it's not. I said, exactly. So I think you make a good point.
For me, the whole idea of nothing, I was introduced to it through Theravada, through the idea of no self. And it was this, and maybe for Western people, but for me, this it was the scariest idea to grapple with in sort of Buddhist thought.
The idea of no self.
Yeah, I think if you cut, for me at least, you come from a Judeo-Christian upbringing. I was raised, I was a good Catholic boy. You're told that you have a soul, and then all of a sudden you're told in Buddhism that I don't know if exactly they're saying you have no soul, but when you're presented with the whole not self thing, like the idea, are you saying that I don't exist? What are you saying? I don't have a soul? Is that blasphemy? What does that
Yeah.
uh, mean?
Yeah. Well, I think to unpack that a little bit, and I'm just riffing here a little bit, but I think from the Buddhist perspective without getting into too much detail and esoteric sort of contemplation. Buddhism believes that we are the water that we drink, right? That comes from the clouds that are in the sky. And it's like this whole kind of concept of interconnectedness, I guess, to boil it down. You can't really just say, I am this concrete person because you are an amalgamation of your parents, your grandparents, and then everything going back since the beginning of time. So if you really start to pull that thread, right, you kind of realize like one of those other famous koans is like, can you even describe the eyes and face and nose that you were before you were born? You know what I mean? The kind of thing.
Yes,
So I don't know if you agree with me about that.
I completely agree with that. And it makes me think about like even something I've been thinking about is like as you kind of get older, you always think like, oh, like I've really learned stuff and I've got it. But like the thing is that you keep on getting older and the context of your life changes. So like all of a sudden you're the old dude and there's young teenagers that you have to relate to them as an old dude, not as a teenager. And like so
Yeah,
your context is never solid because it's always changing. So
exactly. That's another huge Buddhist concept, right? Is impermanence. Fantastic. Well, listen, Jeff, I want to get into a little bit of your backstory because, as my listeners, I think, are aware, I ask people to come on who typically have some sort of background in Zen, spirituality, but then also can apply it to their everyday life, their career. You and I have a lot in common. We're both from New York, both East Coasters
yes.
who ended up in LA, both kind of stumbled into Buddhism. So walk me and the listeners through how you got into Buddhism. And originally I know it was Theravada and then it became a little bit of a Zen practice as well. So yeah, walk me through that whole backstory.
Well, have you ever been to Chuan Yin Monastery in New York? Have you heard of it?
I have not been to it. I have heard of it.
So there's a Buddhist monastery in Cold Spring, New York, that if you walked in there, you'd say, I'm in China. It's this massive sprawling space that has the biggest Buddha statue in North America. It's a really interesting place because it's a non-denominational Buddhist temple that was started by a Chinese doctor. I came to Buddhism by way of, well, first, my mom was always interested in Eastern spirituality, and so she liked to go there. A, she was interested in Buddhism, and B, they just had like a really good like a vegan lunch every Sunday.
Wow.
So I would go there all the time, but I think when I started working, I came to realize that I was struggling really hard, and I realized I had ADHD. Um,
Mm.
and so I was trying to figure out how do I succeed with this sort of deficit because I was feeling really stressed out at work. I was having a really hard time focusing. So I started experimenting with medication, which was effective, but I was like, what other avenues are out there? And I think if you do have ADHD and you type it in the internet, you quickly get meditation as sort of the first thing that pops up or one of the things that pop up. So I was like, oh, well, I've got this monastery. And so I started meditating a little bit and I saw that they had advertised a 10-day retreat. And I thought,
Vipassana or no?
it was a Vipassana, and the first book that I was reading actually was Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So actually my first sort of theological grounding in Buddhism was actually from that book.
Yeah.
But so I was like, I should go learn how to meditate. So I went on this retreat, and I was very depressed at the time too, because I thought it was hopeless a little bit. So I went on this retreat and I said, I'm gonna meditate, and I was pretty militant about it. One thing they tell you at mindfulness retreats is like that you don't do well, sometimes you do it in Zen, but not in much in Soto Zen, sort of the noting practice. So I remember the monk said, if you're walking, note in your mind you're walking. He's like, if you're peeing, note in your mind you're peeing, washing your hands. And I took it very quite seriously, which I don't know that everybody, maybe I took it too seriously, but I was noting every second of the day.
Wow.
It's sort of just weird things started happening to me. I don't get too much into it, but I started having what like you sort of call spiritual experiences where I could see sort of reality phasing in and out. And stuff that you hear about it if you sort of go on a retreat, but I didn't really understand the context of it at the time.
Yeah. How old were you?
I was like 25 or 26. I remember I'm having these experiences and not knowing exactly how to process them, like talking to the teacher every day, and we would do it in a group, and then obviously you would do it one on one.
Yeah.
But I'm saying these sort of a little bit wild things, and my other people are kind of like, this guy's crazy. But I remember that the one of the teachers handed me a piece of paper. All conditioned things are subject to all conditioned things are not self. All conditioned things are suffering. And that was my first exposure to the sort of three characteristics. Long story short, so I became so sort of one pointed in that trip that it sort of it changed my worldview really.
Wow, so that 10-day retreat transformed you.
In some way, yes. To tie it into writing and that, like I had wanted to be a writer, but I would just write stuff and not do much with it. And I would worry a lot. If I go to LA, what happens if I do this? I would spin out about it. And like coming out of the retreat and being in this sort of mind state I'd never experienced, it was like punctured my self-narrative a little bit.
Wow.
I kind of realized like, oh, like all the things I'm thinking about are like I created them. Like they're not, I sort of thought they were more,
Concrete?
yeah. And so I was like, well, if I can write my own story, I'm gonna go to LA. And so it was like this, obviously that faded, a couple of days after retreat, you're not like on this sort of meditation high, but
Yeah.
it did change my sort of perception of my own self narrative in a way that really stayed with me, I guess.
Wow. I mean, just to pause you there for a second, I mean, you touch on so many important things. And I guess where I'll stay for now is there is a theory in psychology and therapy called narrative therapy, right? It's typically a lot of times used in family therapy, family systems, right? Where you're changing sort of the family's narrative that they have
Hmm.
gotten so ingrained to telling that could be intergenerational, right? Like this is the story of our family and everyone plays a role and a narrative therapist tries to sort of break that, right? That narrative and get people to sort of see themselves maybe as different characters, which can really shake things up in a positive way, obviously. Mindfulness has become all the rage in mental health treatment. It's utilized for almost every condition you can think of for the most part. It sounds like it really kind of not only sort of got your ADHD somewhat under
Yeah, I
control.
still have ADHD, just disclaimer, you can't go to a
Yeah.
10-day to treat and cure that. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sort of making that disclaimer. But also this idea of going into the retreat a little bit depressed and a little bit hopeless. I mean, some people can hear that, and I know I'm being a little bit dramatic, but sometimes people who have like suicidal ideation, like that's some of the key factors is like hopelessness, you know what I mean, despair, depression, obviously. And so it's like you came out of this 10-day retreat almost transformed with like a whole new narrative and it inspired you to pick up and move across the country to LA and like follow your dreams and then you met your wife and
Yeah.
I mean it's pretty incredible with stop and think about. I don't know how many times you stop and pinch yourself and maybe this podcast is an opportunity to self-reflect a little bit. But in a lot of ways, Jeff, I mean, I feel like this podcast, my whole practice, my whole sort of teaching, coaching program, consulting work, I mean, it all kind of is rooted in what you're describing, and that we do have the power to change our lives for the better if we take the initiative. And I believe a lot of it is rooted in mindfulness for the same reason you're describing, which is sort of breaking our ideas of who we think we are and realizing that the stories that we tell ourselves are just thoughts and they're not real and we could change them at any moment in time. It's not easy to do and it's not like you can necessarily just snap your fingers. It takes work, it takes practice, it takes commitment, consistency. It's possible, and I feel like your story is a prime example of that. And of everyone I've had on the podcast, I mean, I've had a lot of interesting stories, people with addictions and all kinds of things, but yeah, this is, quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, and I think about it a lot that it definitely shifted my worldview, and it's something that it's funny because I sometimes worry when people start meditating because I feel like it worked out. It changed my life in such a positive way, but it's so much more powerful, I think, than people sometimes comprehend, if that makes sense. And that like you can't control when like smashes you open.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a story, and you actually might have been there. And so for those who are listening, Jeff and I have been on many retreats together over the years. We've sat on New Year's together multiple times through the ball dropping, into the new year. We have a deep, deep history together of meditation, particularly on retreat. And one year, as I said, you may or may not have been there, but I don't love telling this story, but I think it's important because you're kind of bringing it up. We're checking everybody in, or at least I am, at the front in the cafeteria, and a guy walks in whose name is Mohawk Matt. And
I'm sorry.
yeah, I mean that's his sort of stage name, but he was the owner of a chain of successful barbershops in and around LA.
Wow.
And obviously he had a mohawk. I don't know if he had one on the retreat. Actually, he had a short one, like a buzz cut mohawk, not like
Hmm.
a tall, spiky one. He went by Mohawk Matt, and I got to know him as from being a customer of his.
Mm.
The name of the barbershop was Bolt Barbers, and he had a couple of monkeys, three monkeys, like
Wow.
monkey see, monkey do kind of, logo. And they at the time were probably one of the more successful, well-known barbershops. And I obviously immediately recognized him. I said, "What's up to him?" I had asked him if he'd ever meditated before coming on the retreat. And he said no. He said, "I'm going through a lot." And I thought like I just need I need meditation. I need to get away. I need to get away from my phone and kind of like my reality. Whatever exchange we had, I was concerned about him. And I remember like the first couple of meditation sessions up at the Zendo, I just could not stop thinking about this guy. I was so concerned about him, knowing that he had never really meditated before, and he was jumping into a Soto Zen,
Yeah.
meditation retreat, which even though hours back then were kind of a nice entry point for beginners, they are still pretty intense if you're not experienced. And so I remember just constantly thinking about him during our sits. The next morning, like on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, we go to the cafeteria for food, and he writes a letter on the cork board in the cafeteria and leaves it and says, "Thanks everyone. I got to take off. It's been a pleasure." And I immediately was obviously concerned. He was going through a divorce. He had just opened up another barbershop in Vegas that
Oh
I think
yeah.
I think maybe wasn't going so well. So I think the divorce and like the business expansion, like maybe kind of moving a little bit too fast, was getting to him, and there might have been some substance abuse. We get back from the retreat, and I hear that he had taken his life.
Yeah.
And I don't think many in the group really paid like a ton of attention because he was in and out so quickly. And I was like, I think the only one that really kind of like knew the story and,
Yeah.
and him. And so, of course, I just think about that because I think you're right that meditation can be a little bit too intense for someone jumping in all alone. And that's why it's important to have teachers and
Yeah.
guides, right? And in the Soto Zen practice, Dokusan is super important, right? To be able to sit down with the teacher one on one and ask those questions if you're feeling anxious, if things are coming up for you that feel unmanageable, to be able
Yeah.
to sit with the teacher and ask those questions. So I don't know if any of that story resonates with you or.
No, it really does. It really does. Because we use it as a therapeutic thing, like I said, like it did change my life. I probably would be the opposite of that. I think I might be dead if I didn't start meditating, or it's very likely.
Wow.
Um, Buddhist meditation is was created to break down your sense of self and then put it back together, and also to show you sort of the force you to stare at the most painful parts
Parts
of
of,
your own existence.
yes.
It's not like an indica gummy. And I think sometimes it's kind of the thing you kind of really don't know if you don't know, so it's hard to express to someone, but I think sometimes people think of it as a indica gummy, or people say, like running is my meditation. It's like, well, I think running's running.
It's not quite the same thing. I think when people use that analogy, it's just the idea that they're like in the present moment, right? They're not thinking about
Yes, of
anything else.
course.
They're not on their phone. And so their running is their form of meditation because they're like fully in the activity, which is fantastic. But I agree with you, it's still not meditation. I don't think there's anything on the planet that humans have access to that is the same thing as sitting still and silent. And the thing about Soto Zen that you know, and is different than Theravada is in Soto Zen, you sit with your eyes open facing a blank white wall, which I think makes it even more intense because the eyes open kind of forces you into this like kind of reality that inescapable. Whereas when your eyes are closed, you could sort of drift off into some dreamlike happy thoughts, whereas open-eyed, it's very hard to do that.
I'll tell you this, and I still kind of struggle with it because the foundation of my practice is in Theravada, and I have such because of my experiences with it and how and what it did for me, I have such an attachment to the noting practice. But obviously, I came to Soto Zen through my wife, who was a member of the Sangha before me. But
And
I
was
find
and was a guest on season one of my show.
yes, Emily Islami Nieves. I found the idea of Soto Zen meditation terrifying.
Wow.
Because you have to understand, I have trouble focusing, and so it's like mindfulness or and vipassana, all those things are amazing for me because I can practice returning to
Breath.
even the word in Pali sort of means like remembering. Returning to, yeah, or just returning to attention, even just whatever you're focusing on. But
Hmm.
Soto Zen is like it's funny because the Sangha has a sort of punk rock thing, but to me, it is the punk rock of
Buddhism.
Buddhism's because it's like it doesn't give you any instruction other than sitting. What is your mind doing? I still don't exactly know. And there's a still a clinging into me when I do shikantaza that I am scared of doing nothing.
I knew it'd be interesting to have you on. I knew you'd have a different perspective as others who are all in on Zen, as I am. So Jeff, let's pivot a little bit because I want to be mindful of our time and everything. So yeah, you've shared so much good insight already into your practice and how it's helped you and some concerns and some theories on the different styles and practices. How has meditation, mindfulness positively influenced your career? So you made the move out to LA. You obviously, I know that you spent a lot of years writing like jingles and campaigns and storyboard campaign slogans. And you leaned, I think you continue to lean more and more into your screenwriting, right? And then
Hmm.
kind of had a couple of nice breakthroughs and have had success there. How is meditation and mindfulness helping you as someone with ADD, ADHD, trouble focusing? How's it helping you in your professional career as a Hollywood screenwriter?
So as you sort of mentioned, and I worked in branding and advertising, and I had got into a very niche part of the field, which is naming. So it was
Yeah.
just coming up with names for stuff, names and
Yeah.
taglines. And I remember early on in my career, I was talking to a guy who was more senior than me and was just like, I'm kind of feeling stuck on this. And he was like, you just got to turn off the part of your brain that like says no. What I ended up learning was and the way this relates to meditation, because I think meditation really is what helped allowed me to do it, which was I would come up with ideas for names. So if you gave me a brief, I would come up with 1,000 ideas. And never once did I ask myself if it was a good idea. I would just come up with the name and write it
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. This is huge.
And
Non-judgment.
yes, exactly. And I funny because my wife ended up working with me, and I would say,
Yeah.
even if you come up with a joke idea that you know is not is actually almost your way of fighting it, making fun of what you're doing, I would write it down. And then I would go back and I would look at it and I would say, what is actually good here? And what I would find is 80% of it was not good. But if you do 1,000 ideas and 20% of them are good, you have 200 good ideas. If I sat down and thought about and analyzed every idea I had, I would have about five.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So it becomes like a numbers game, but the more that you could tap into your creativity without judging it, the more that you discover that there's gold in there.
Yeah. Like in Buddhism, with especially with Soto Zen, there's a neutrality. You're just sitting, you're not
Yeah,
doing,
it's goalless.
yeah, you're just naming. I'm just coming up with these words. I'm not editing. I'm not doing anything else but this piece of it. And I think that really applies a lot to screenwriting too, because screenwriting, I mean, maybe Tarantino or somebody writes something down and it's perfect. Maybe ChatGPT, I don't know. A lot of times in professional screenwriting, you're getting it wrong most of the time. You're doing a draft and you're doing another draft, and you need to have a sort of emotional protective layer or something. You need to not be so hurt if what you came up with is wrong.
It sounds like you have to have thick skin.
It's interesting because if going back to sort of the naming or the non-judgment, it's like you have to have no skin or something. It's like the less the less you worry about whether something's good, the more you can actually do it. And that goes with writing too, because you sit down when you're writing, and most writers will tell you this, the hardest thing to do is start writing. And then
Yeah.
I actually really need to clean my kitchen or email. And then now we have the internet. And so
Yeah. A lot of distractions.
and the biggest distraction I think is the fear of being wrong for me, acceptance of being that I'm gonna be wrong, and then but there's something right in there, and then if I do it enough, if I just submit to it, something will come out of value.
Do you also find that because I feel like you're circling around what I'm about to ask you, and do you actually believe that meditation and the lifestyle, the practice actually helps enhance your creativity? Because I think what you're describing is a creative approach in itself, right? Acceptance, not judgmental, thick skin slash no skin, like understanding 80% of it's not going to be any good, being okay with that. Like to me, that's all kind of creating a framework for a creative process.
Yeah, I think a lot of times for artists, like I don't know more creative, less creative. It's a hard thing to answer, but I wouldn't finish anything. I wouldn't be able to do it. Wouldn't be able to be doing anything without the meditation, if that makes any sense. So it sort of doesn't matter because I think it lets you be creative because you can be braver if even if you have a little bit and you don't have 100%, but if you even have 2% of you that feels like you're a no self, fear that and you write poetry, you do art as well. I think
Yeah.
there's when you start writing, there's a character to your writing that is unbridled, and it's not good in the sense that you don't know what you're doing, but there is something about it that's very raw, and it when you as you keep on doing it, you're judging of it. It gets worse because all the times you failed that you didn't know you could fail before on some level, and I think you can't really access that part of being creative without. And I don't know if you need meditation to do it. For me, it's been the path, but without accessing a sense of not having a self, I think.
Do you think there's also an element of authenticity that it brings out?
Well, yeah, I think when you're not protecting yourself, you're generally much more authentic because you go into a conversation, your social anxiety, what does this person think about me? That's not authenticity. And that's what I do most of the time, but I do think it helps you be more authentic as an artist for sure.
It's fantastic. I mean, you said something just a little while ago that I've like literally never heard anyone say, and I think it's going to be branded into my brain forever. If people listening get something out of it, that's fantastic. But describing meditation as making you braver, I think is really, really powerful because I don't want to make this like a gender thing, but I think everyone, whether male, female, non-binary, I think everyone wants to be braver, right? I think that's a quality that most humans would agree universally on. Like, hey, if I could even become 1% braver, I'll take it. Obviously, you know, and I know that there is an element of that in meditation, like going on retreat. You have to be brave, right? But I don't know, just the way that you said it. And then I also wrote down no fear, which is an old brand that we grew up with, right? From like
Yeah, yes, the hats,
the 90s.
skateboard stuff. Yes.
Yeah, and they had their moment in the sun. They were kind of a bit of a one-hit wonder, but that whole brand was based on this slogan, right? No fear, like kind of like Nike's just do it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that people looking at meditation that way could actually create some additional buy-in from people who might be on the fence because there's people that are actively circling my world, right? That have reached out to me or have shown interest and then they kind
Yeah.
of disappear. And I know
Yeah.
that there's fear to commit, fear to sort of unpack or see what might be lurking in the shadows, and
Yeah.
that takes bravery. So I appreciate you sort of acknowledging that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it goes back to, and like I said, I'm probably one of the most fearful people you could possibly meet. And that's, I think, why making someone 1% braver, 10% braver is quite valuable. But, I guess it's like, who's afraid or who are you protecting? I think meditation makes you ask that. And from one point of view, there is no one that you're protecting.
Where do you think your practice goes from here? You're now a father.
Yes.
Congratulations. I'm sure that your practice, your ability to set time aside to meditate, to go to a center, I'm sure all of that has been turned upside down. I am not a parent, so do you have any thoughts, words of wisdom, anything to say to parents out there that maybe want to get involved in meditation, but just say, I don't have any time, man. You know how many parents have told me that like they barely have 5, 10, 15 minutes for themselves, no less meditation. Yeah, any kind of final thoughts on, your practice now as a father?
I think a lot about like a teacher that I had at Chuan Yen, and they would talk about, in the Pali Canon, it talks about meditation, but it talks about sitting, standing, walking, lying down in Soto Zen. I mean, yeah, obviously just sitting is very important, but so is Kinhin, so is walking. So maybe you can't sit down, but you can walk. I mean, for me, a lot of times when I lie down to bed, I'll note, I'm lying down, there's no and this is actually because I'm here and maybe someone will listen to this. This is my hobby horse. You have a body issue, you have bad knees, if you could sit in a chair. You can sit seiza, which is sort of like, how would you describe it? It's like kneeling.
Yes, yeah, a kneeling position. Yeah.
You don't have to look like a Buddha statue to meditate.
The other thing too, Jeff, that you might remind me of is that as I was kind of building out my coaching practice, I couldn't force everyone into the Soto Zen, open-eyed, silent, still box, right? I had to meet people where they were.
Yeah.
And so I developed a program just to quickly share with you and the listeners. The first module, right, is traditional Soto Zen,
Hmm.
open-eyed, blank white wall, silent, still, no mantra, nothing, right? The second one is a guided meditation,
Yeah.
where I'm guiding people. I'm talking during the whole time, talking, making sure that they're coming back to their breath, a straight spine. I got certified in breath work, right? So just allowing people to do triangle breathing, box breathing,
Hmm.
in breath, out breath, counting breaths.
Yeah.
The fourth is meditation of movement, right? Or yoga, kinhin, right? Any kind of movement where
Yeah.
you're actually moving, but like you said, you're noting, you're coming back to your breath, you're being mindful in the midst of movement and activity. And then the last one is laying down,
But yeah.
and I call it the body scan meditation, where I'm starting at the tip of people's heads and going all the way to the tips of their toes, walking
Hmm.
them through every part of their body and just letting them lay there and breathe into those spaces, right? The shoulders and the facial muscles and, the calves and everything. And people typically are just like super mellow and just
Yeah.
relaxed by the end of that. There's ways of doing this, right? In your everyday life, as you're like laying in bed, you could do a body scan med. On your way home, you could do a little bit of breath work in the car while you're driving without causing any
Yeah. Or
crashes.
you're walking to your car.
Yeah, that's really the practice, right? I remember there's a famous story. The author and the monk is a little bit controversial now, but the book is called The Diamond Cutter. The student The author was living in Tibet for 7 years, 8 years, was done with his practice. And he looked at his teacher and he said, "Hey, where do I go from here?" And he goes, "Go back home to New York." And he's like, "You want me to go back to New York, from Tibet?" And he's like, what better place in the world to challenge and practice than in the heart of
Yeah.
Manhattan?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about that. It's a little bit easier to practice when you live like I'm living out in the desert and super quiet and peaceful and chill. But it's a little bit challenging when I'm traveling and when I have the holidays coming up and a lot of family around. And that's when
Yeah.
practice becomes a little bit more challenging. That's where you really see where you're at. That's the true
That's
test.
true. Yeah, and I mean, you can get weird with it. I used to try to go out sometimes and walk around and just generate meta for everyone that I saw. It's not so set in stone.
Yeah. Cool, Jeff. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I know you have a little one back at home. Do you have any final parting thoughts or words you want to share with the audience? Any projects you have coming up you want to talk about? And if not, that's all good too.
I'd love to hear the koan one more time.
Oh, look at you. I have done it before at the end of the show, so this is but I appreciate you having me come back to it. A monk asked his teacher, "What concrete thing did the ancestral masters get when they obtained the peaceful state?" The teacher replied, "It is like a thief who enters an empty room." Do you want to hear Nishijima's commentary?
Yes, I would love to. Yes.
I haven't read it at all, ever, I don't think. The master said that the state of the ancient masters who entered the ineffable is like a thief who has broken into a room with tremendous effort, only to find that the room is empty. In other words, the ultimate state of Buddhist study is recognition that reality exists as it is. It is empty of anything superfluous. There is nothing more or less than reality.
I think we can't beat that, so
Shall we end there?
I think so. Thanks so much for having me, Craig.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. If you made it this far, that means you've listened to the whole podcast. And for that, I want to say thank you. Please feel free to visit my website or social media for more information on my work at Craig Jared French. Until next time.